Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is a timely conversation. We are going to be looking at fighting genocide ideology and denial as part of conversations around Kwibuka 28 as Rwanda commemorates 28 years since the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. We're going to look at the impact of genocide denial and ideology in the youth, especially in the diaspora, as well as how we can collectively counter this narrative as a country. I'm happy to welcome with us our guests. We have two guests with us online, and I'll start with Jessica Gerondal-Miza, who is the Vice President of Ibuka France. Jessica, if you can have you on your screens, a pleasure to have you on The Square.
Hello.
Great. We also have with us Tom Dahiro, who is a genocide scholar, also will be joining the show online. Tom, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hi.
Great. Also joining us in studio is Louis-Antoine Muhire. He wears many hats, but today he's here with us, just as a business owner. Louis-Antoine Muhire, it's great to have you on the show. I know this is not your first or second time, so it's always a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me.
Great. My name's Dan Mpisi, host of The Square, and as always, I'm joined by the Square and panelists. And Charles, I'd like to start by welcoming you. Great to have you on the show.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
We missed you last week.
We
missed you very much.
Yes. Also joining us is Brenna Namata. Brenna, resident panelist of the show. Great to have you. As we always do before we kick off, are there any midweek highlights, Charles or Brenna, that you'd like to share?
Mine is just a bit general. I think it's not really related to the topic that we're discussing today. It's to do with aggression with which roads are being done, and the whole, everywhere you pass there's a new road and the whole infrastructure rollout. Very excited about that. Guess it will reduce the jams and congestion that we've been experiencing in Kigali. Excited about that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brenna, any midweek highlights? Okay, so we will kick off on this particular topic. Thank you very much to our guests for joining us, to our viewers. Please keep the conversation going using #TheSquareRW. So thank you very much to Jessica and Tom and you and Louis-Antoine. The first topic that I want us to discuss is just to look at genocide ideology. So according to the National Commission for the Fight Against the Genocide, over 1,100 cases of genocide ideology were recorded in the last 4 years between 2017 to 2020. One would think that almost 3 decades after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, these sort of issues would be not really on the steady increase as they are. And my first question, I'll start with you, Tom, is in your opinion, what are some of the reasons for this, today? These increases in genocide ideology cases and the general landscape, what are the reasons as to why it's still being perpetuated? And, what are your opinions on how we can collectively combat it? Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Diana. Well, there are several reasons, but I will just mention about 3 of them. One is with the time, people tend to forget that this ideology has sources, and these sources is from people who have children, and because of impunity, which is the second reason, you have people with an ideology, you have an impunity, and then you have this transmission of this ideology from parents to children, as it came from grandfathers to grandparents to children, and now to grandparents. And this is what we see in some associations outside Rwanda, and it's something to worry about. The third reason is some sort of indifference and ignorance, a mixture of the two. A mixture of indifference and ignorance, whereby people do not understand that with genocide denial, which is intertwined with genocide ideology, that people do not understand these two things when they come together, which they remain together, slowly penetrate the society, and some people get worried but don't act. And when they act late. And also the fact that in history, if you look at the people who committed the genocide in 1994, in 1959, were either not yet born or were young. So the existence of those three factors, for those who are in Europe or in America, whatever they say, it is the freedom, it's their right, a freedom of expression, and none touches them, which is different from what happens when someone would preach Nazism, but when someone would come out and talk about Nazism, preaches it, supports it, the countries where they are, especially the first world, they'll just come out for you, deal with you, and silence you, but not with the genocide against the Tutsi. So I think the three things leads to the perpetuation of this heinous phenomena.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'd like to go to you, Jessica. And Tom, thank you for mentioning that denial and ideology are interlinked. But I just want to start by focusing on ideology. And Jessica, you're Vice President of Ibuka France. If you could also share with us your opinions on why, genocide ideology, 28 years after the genocide against the Tutsi, is still as strong as ever. In your opinion, what are some of the reasons for this, and how can we collectively combat this?
In the French context, it seems that it is always the families of genocidaires who popularize this discourse. Their allies may also do so, whether in extreme right-wing magazines or left-wing magazines or on social networks. And the thing is, I still have trouble with the idea that time improves those things. Concerning the big issues, racism, anti-Semitism, or big crimes like slavery and genocides, backtracking is always possible. And I guess the fight will never end. We are fighting against divisive and racist ideologies. And on the other side, there are people who need these ideologies to advance their causes, their careers, political careers, for example, or their families. And I see, for example, families spreading the ideology of genocide so that their elders will not be condemned in justice. Also, I hear political figures, especially Congolese ones, spreading the genocide ideology simply because it is extremely popular and it's gaining power in the region and in the diasporas, of course. They are really, really bad, and they have nothing to propose in terms of economical or social program for their citizens. So they accuse the Tutsis of everything and anything. Often one observes that they do not even dare to say Tutsi, but they will say the Rwandan government or the power. That makes themselves understood, but in a subtle way. And I think we really must understand that the fight against that will really never end. We will fight and win battles to the end, and our children too will continue this behind us. We are here in the great history of racism, and racism, like genocidal ideology, will evolve, change, and move forward masked. And we will also refine our tactics, and we will not give up. That's the idea.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Over to you, Louis-Antoine Muhire. We've had these conversations with you on the square several times, and I just want, from your opinion, your experience, why do you think genocide ideology is still something that is happening in this day and age when it comes to the genocide against the Tutsi?
Well, I think, first of all, I support what previous speakers or guests said. And one thing we have absolutely to keep reminding ourselves is, if we take the example of, for example, the genocide against Jewish people, sorry, despite they have many countries who have adopted laws against the denials, we still see young people, for example, in the West, in the US, in France, very teenagers who are promoting the Nazis' ideology and ready to even harm anyone who's called Jewish. So in the Rwandan case, we have to be ready. As Jessica said, this is going to be a lifetime fight. And one thing also we have to know is it's for everyone. Sometimes I see people who wait after the government to say if the government could do this, could do that. I think, as Jessica said, we need absolutely to make this fight ours. And no matter what side you may find yourselves in, a genocide against any community, it's something that should be condemned by anyone. So for me, based on the experience I had from the previous National Unity Reconciliation Commission that is now part of the new Ministry of Unity, we've come to discover that tactics are changing. If we go in the history of Rwanda, back in the 60s, it was about newspaper spread by, unfortunately, even priests from the church against the minority Tutsi. And in '94, we had now the radio, RTL and Mille Collines, and nowadays we have social media. So I can predict that in the near future, we are going to have artificial intelligence, where fake news will also be embedded into this denial movement. So we also have to adapt to this fight, and we have to make sure that they don't overcome the good side, if I can say. At the same time also, we have to make sure that the new generation, as Jessica said, get access to the right version of the history and not access to fake news and other kind of narrative from, as the previous guest said, from the either relatives or offsprings of the people who committed the genocide in Rwanda.
Thank you very much, Louis-Antoine Muhire. I'd like to go to Charles Brenner. Your opinions on this. Brenner, I'll kick off with you.
It's a tough one, but I think, like they said, it's one of those things that we'll have to deal with as a country for the longest, and also it will continue to evolve. But I think there's more that we can do even internally. One, in terms of documentation. There's a generation now of young people who are 28 who have lived through, and I think the challenge now is that perhaps most of them will begin questioning what they were told, you know, by their parents. And so how do you get a buy-in from these young people to really understand history as is and not as their families would want them to, you know, take it? It's not easy. I personally have an issue with, for instance, genocide studies. They're not yet as popular as they should be. You still have a lot of work left to NGOs, and I don't think that would give us the push that we need, you know. Ideally, it should be a core subject to a certain level. The experts in the field would be able to determine what level. But I think genocide studies have to be a core subject. The way you would have English and math, you know. Yeah, because once you have that, then you have a certain level of, one, awareness, but also facts are facts. You know, they shouldn't be subject to debate. Right now, you continue to see, again, because it's evolving on social media, some people trying to bring up debates that you would think are unquote, like ideally there shouldn't be any debate about what happened. I mean, we live with survivors. We know what happened. But you see people trying to bring a debate, double genocide. And while, you get angry, and sometimes it's difficult to deal with that. To be able to say, do I take time and educate this person, or there's no need to even engage them, So it's difficult. And so how you deal with that as a country is again, there are no easy answers. But the more we have movements of young people that have an appreciation of history, and again, making it core. And I see this, I'll tell you, even from our own newsroom. You get young journalists, students who've just finished from University of Rwanda. And when you ask them to cover stories around commemoration, the kind of stories they write, you wonder, what exactly were you studying? Like, 3 years at university and still you have no grasp of what the facts are around 94. So it's tough. And so even when we're talking about the diaspora, even internally, I think we still have that problem that you have many young people coming out of school with no sense of history, and as such, the next 100 days don't mean much to them. It's a day. The week is the 7 days are just a slow week, and there's not so much interest in what that actually means. Yeah,
those are valid points. Sort of ensuring that it's part of our educational system, curricula in high schools. I really agree with that. I'm really not sure about how we teach genocide studies in this country to our youth. Very valid point there. And you are absolutely right in terms of the awareness, the importance of this period. Every year it just becomes, especially amongst the youth, I feel that it becomes less and less. Although, to be fair, there are youth groups that still, in their own way promote awareness, especially on social media. I think last year we had some of them here, especially because, things were happening during the lockdown and they used that opportunity. But broadly speaking, I think it's something that needs to be given the importance, over the next 100 days, especially amongst our young people year after year. Charles, over to you.
When you're convicted of a crime and you're sent to prison, you either come out bitter or better. Now, not everyone will come out bitter, not everyone will come out better. If you come out better, it means you have been corrected. Now, we are facing a big challenge as a country because I'll just give an age of 18 as a number, that a person who participated in the genocide at the age of 18, even if that is an age of adulthood, the likelihood of that person having been used without being in their full consciousness is extremely high. And maybe that person has served a 25-year sentence, and today he's coming out and he or she is 43 years old. The likelihood of that person, and assume I'll put that person in the category of the bitter ones, 43-year-old person is full of youth and full of energy and so if you have a 43-year-old who has not yet been corrected, that person is very toxic to the society. Now, if that person is being released today as a toxic person, imagine how toxic they have been for the last 25 years of serving their term. And that's in my opinion, that's the biggest problem that that the genocide ideology has. Is that today, 28 years later, we are having people who have completed their terms, who are being rolled out into society, and I believe many of them, I do not have the statistics offhand, are not better people. So one thing that comes into my mind is, why were they not corrected? It's because within their cells, within their prison facilities, wherever they were, there was a deliberate move not to, to ensure that they are not corrected by most likely the perpetrators, or what the Kinyarwanda famous word, the Ruharwas. To make matters worse, you have people who were in the international prisons, Arusha, Niger, wherever they were serving time. And those that did not get life sentences and got very prolonged sentences are now beginning to come out. For crying out loud, we had people in Niger who served their sentence completed, and people didn't know what to do then. These are extremely toxic. They breathe, live, and eat the genocide ideology. So I think we and the likes of Tom, I'm glad that my good friend Tom is on the show. We have a lot of work to do in terms of ensuring that the fight, and I think Jessica used the same words, that they'll have new tricks up their sleeves and they'll never tire. That the fight has to keep going on, because however much we have been doing efforts with the people who are around in our different communities, in the villages, the ones who are beginning to complete their sentences are another ulcer in our society. Yeah.
Charles, very valid points. In fact, usually, we have 2 weeks dedicated to conversations around memorial of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Actually, next week is something, this is something worth discussing. Perpetrators being reintegrated into society. I think that deserves a conversation on its own, and I'm really looking forward to tackling it next week with, the ministries and various actors. So, very valid points regarding genocide ideology. What's the saying? Not to rest on your laurels. It's not going to disappear on its own. If anything, it needs to be counted all the time. And, people like Tom, who are relentless in combating this narrative. I think we all know his voice on different platforms. Tom, before we go to the next part of the conversation, which is genocide denial, I just want to know if you and Jessica have any feedback based on what Charles Brenner and Muhire have said. I'll start with you, Tom.
Thank you, Diana. May I thank you? You are squarists? Are you calling them squarists? Haba and Namata. To begin with, from what Namata said, which I very much agree with, is that we should, and it's not in the future, but we should have said we should 2 years ago, or 20 years ago, that genocide ideology remains an existential threat to our country and, of course, to our region. You still have individuals, not those who are coming out of prison, whom Charles has just mentioned. Majority of those who spew this hatred are not in prisons, and who maybe are going to be released. Majority of the Ruharwas, or the core criminals in our prisons in the country, most of them are serving life sentences. But those who promote the genocide ideology, majority of whom are outside, and majority of whom remain bitter and not better, are not becoming any better. When you have the former Prime Minister Kambanda is serving a life sentence, publishing a book, he's in prison, denying the genocide, still propagating the same ideology. But those who are publishing their books in France and some in Belgium Nobody talks about them. I'm coming back to the issue of impunity. They're still talking about when you have individuals like Joseph Matata, this Jambo News, this Thomas Nahimana, all of them, their ideology now is back to 1959, 1919, and before 1994. That is, Tutsis are aliens, Tutsis are devious by nature, they are power hungry, dictatorial, they are real victims, the real victims are the Hutus. And all this is to make the young doubt of what they have been hearing during the commemorations, and mostly, not all the time after the commemorations. So why is the idea brought up by Namata so valid? Genocide studies indeed needs to be a core subject. People have to be reminded that if a country is having an existential threat, which is this ideology, people need to understand that the first thing to tackle this heinous crime in people's minds and psychic is to understand the structuring of the narrative. To some, it went beyond being just a narrative, but a meta-narrative. We need to have young people more engaged in fighting this ideology. So far, those who spew this hatred, they sound more cohesive, committed, and using the means they have, they are reaching as many, and they don't have an equal to counter them. And of course, to counter these people, you need to understand what they say, how they say it, the channels, comparing this ideology they have to what happened before the genocide. When you have, for example, Rora Wase of the Jambo News, who is a politician in Belgium, she was just 2 years old in 1994. But today, she's another one among those who are spewing this obnoxious ideology in the name of freedom of expression. But who is to counter these people in the next 2, 3, 4 years of her age? And who can challenge them with the facts? Because most of those who are being who are getting their propaganda through internet will be confused and keep on doubting, and they need counter narratives. And these counter narratives are not hard to get; they are there. The issue is who puts them forward to them. I think let me make that point.
Thank you.
As of now, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. And actually, that's a good segue into the next part of the conversation, which is really around denial. In the interest of time, I'll just head into it. And Jessica, I want to start with you and then over to Muhire. We've actually had on the show before, a renowned author, British journalist Linda Melbourne, once stated that the only way to challenge denial is with the facts. Only the facts will disprove the claims of deniers. The facts are all we have to counter it. So just like Tom said, facts, facts, facts. But also, as Tom was saying, there's a growing crop, a younger generation that is really propagating genocide denial, mostly in the diaspora. And my question to you is, from your experience, what are some of the latest trends in genocide denial? Just to start off by giving us, an understanding of the landscape of genocide denial and what some of the latest trends are. Over to you, Jessica.
I don't know if the trends are really new. In any case, the strategies have become more refined. I see accounts of young women my age deniers, putting in their Twitter and Instagram bios that they are anti-colonial, Afro-feminist activists, like me. That's my bio too, actually. And we know that it works. Even when I read something on the internet, I will try to understand who the person writing is. If in the French context, this person identifies himself as anti-colonial, anti-racist, and feminist, it will touch me. I will say to myself, so okay, this person is okay. And they take advantage also of the movements in the African diasporas that fight against real oppressions produced by their governments, for example, Nigerians or Kenyans, to insinuate that those who fight against the denial of the genocide against the Tutsi are anti-democratic and against freedom of speech. And that is a real good strategy. It works. We are the oppressor. They cannot speak. And for people who don't know nothing about our history, this is a good strategy. And afterward, I think that there will always be the old negationist theories. The Tutsi would have provoked their genocide. There would have been as many Tutsi deaths as Hutus. Double genocide it's always the same stuff, but it is the clothes and the makeup that change. It's really how they present themselves. We cannot say those young people are perpetrators. So they can be whatever they want, whoever they want. And they show themselves as, as superheroes for freedom of speech.
Thank you, Jessica. It's alarming to see this sort of sophisticated element when it comes to genocide denial, and also the fact that it's really being strongly driven by young generations across different media. It's, if anything, it just shows you how somber this situation is. I'd like to hear from Muhire. Same question, really. What are some of the trends or mutations regarding genocide denial, and what do you think needs to be done? Over to you, Muhire.
Well, allow me to go back a little bit to what Mr. Ndahiro said. We are actually at a critical moment of this fight, because the example he gave of young people who were barely 1 year, 2 years old at the moment, now are at the forefront of that movement of denials. And we also have to underline that they are well educated. They are going to those universities, Western universities, and most likely they're going to become MPs. They're going maybe to become even CEOs of great companies. So one could wonder what's going to happen if there is enough of them with a lot of money, with a lot of influence on international level. So it's a very dangerous, it's a danger that is definitely we shouldn't take lightly. So that said, again, I come back to the point of inviting young people to definitely not wait after the UN, the government of Rwanda or Friends of Rwanda, but themselves they could regroup into movement and engage those governments where these deniers are. We've seen now things moving from, for example, Belgium to Canada. Recently, I think Australia is taking over. There are laws that forbid anyone to deny genocide against Jewish. And I think this could be a benchmark for this movement to be formed by these young people, to say the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994 was recognized officially by the UN and by many countries. Therefore, how come we have laws against deniers of the genocide against Jewish, but in other countries, when it comes to the genocide against the Tutsi, it becomes freedom of expression? So we will have to invest our energy, our money. We cannot just, I mean, mostly people in the diaspora, cannot just sit around and wait after the government of Rwanda to act. Now, to conclude, what I think should be done, again, as Tom said, first of all, it's a lifetime. It will never end. We have to expect that not only those who are getting out of prison, but also the offsprings of now adults, young people, I don't know how to say it. They're 2 years old in 94, now they are adults, they are having kids, and one can guess already what they are telling their kids. So you can see how long this fight is going to take. Therefore, we need absolutely to make sure, so on the other side, on the good side, young people are engaged. The genocide ideology, it's something that can't just be finished as a war, a traditional war. It's something that will definitely be there for a while, unfortunately. And one shouldn't be surprised to see that even kids who are to be yet born, maybe let's say 10 years from now on, later on they will definitely take over what their grandfather narrative had. And actually we have already some examples of families from the grandfathers. They are conveying this message of Tutsis are this and that. So we have to be ready and invest our time, our money, not necessarily wait after the government or the UN, but ourselves. Let's engage and fight this ideology with all means. Otherwise, I think the future will be not secure for the whole nation if one just wait after the government or the UN to fight these deniers.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, Louis-Antoine, when, talking about being proactive in terms of countering this narrative and not really relying on government and various, international organizations. Bernard Charles, over to you. Just remarks from what our guests have said.
Yeah, just to refer to what Jessica mentioned around the mobilization that is happening around the African diaspora. I think that's quite sensitive. And that is a place where you actually also need a lot of effort. Because on one hand, generally the African diaspora tends to be, if I could use the word, pro-Rwanda. But so if you have these people that come to them and present to them a distorted picture, then it is a problem. So beyond saying as Rwandans we need to counter, we should be also reaching out. And again, because we see that the deniers are relentless. They are quoting, they're also quoting foreigners. And we've seen, in addition to the list that that Tom shared, we know that there are foreigners now who are also publishing books, and with all sorts of distortions, and they have wide platforms. And the tendency with narratives is that you'll find that people will tend to believe someone and say, oh, that one is a foreigner, so since they are not Hutu or Tutsi, maybe their version is the right one, So even that is really critical, how you deal with that. So there are no easy answers. There are no easy answers. I kept thinking that it is it is a cross that we have to carry as a country, but we also have to try and get as many allies to understand our history, but also join the campaign. Yeah.
Not too far from that, I just want to emphasize that there has to be a sort of a commonality in terms of delivering the message when we are preaching against genocide deniers or against genocide ideology. Sometimes you almost get the feeling that there is an overemphasis amongst we who live in Rwanda and in our neighboring countries, especially like in the DRC, where you still have FDLR that is very active, and but then when you go further afield, where Bana was saying, you you have people who have writings that are easier to sell, and you almost get the feeling that the message, and I'm glad Louis Antoine is here. He's just recently returned from the diaspora, not too many years ago. That the message is not in the same aggression or effectiveness as we have here at home. So in terms of all the efforts that we do in preachings and writings and tellings against genocide, all the campaigns that we do against, to remind people that it should be uniform across everywhere where we can spread our tentacles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In concluding remarks, I just want to ask our guests, the last, just closing remarks. But before that, there's some tweets that I'd like us to read that are coming in, and I'd like to encourage our viewers to just keep them coming using #TheSquareRW. The first tweet, if you could have it on our screens, is from the dandy who says, young people should understand they're not the future, they're the now, and should unite and equip themselves with information to be able to take leadership positions. History will be taught through today's best teacher, technology, and via a Pan-African tech platform. So I think, this person is obviously responding to the issue of young people and being proactive and mobilizing to counter these narratives when it comes to genocide ideology and genocide denial regarding the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. My question really to our guests, if you can be as brief as possible in concluding remarks, is regarding the next steps. Just to recap what many of you have been saying, I'm getting this feeling from what everyone has been saying, perhaps we're underestimating the magnitude of genocide ideology and genocide denial, even almost 3 decades after the event that happened. And just to recap, and I'll start with you, Jessica, what do you think needs to be done, collectively as a country, as Rwandans, when it comes to fighting genocide denial and ideology? Over to you, Jessica.
I think it's possible that young people underestimate somewhat the magnitude of the challenge. As young activists, we sometimes have the impression that our friends congratulate us, but they tell us that they don't have a role to play, that it is for others, it's too complicated, it's not for them. And on the other hand, the young negationists do not think before acting. They have been taught since childhood that they have a mission, and they have understood it well, and they are fulfilling their role. We feel it strongly in France and in Belgium. They are numerous, they are determined, and they do not back down from anything. No matter how big the lie is, they will defend it as if their lives depend on it. And by their determinations, they manage to spread doubts. And us, while we are fighting the important figures of the denial discourse, and we have to, the negationists who are ordinary citizens are working in the fields everywhere and every day, in virtual and in real. With the repetition of their discourse, it works, and people end up saying to themselves, like we say in French, there's no smoke without fire. So all they are saying all day long, it must be true. And if the denial's message is repeated so often, then it becomes the truth for so many people. That's why young people really need to wake up and defend our history everywhere and all the time, with their friends, their colleagues, at the hairdresser, on Twitter and on Instagram, even with the smallest accounts. And our elders, they need to make their knowledge more accessible. And this is really important because the information is out there for those who know how to look for it, but our elders, they can lead on and offer historical trainings and maybe on social media too.
Thank you. Thank you. very much, Jessica. It's been an honor having you on the square, and I know you do a lot of profound work in this particular, field of genocide, combating genocide ideology and denial narratives. It's really inspiring to see you as a young person really dedicated to this. So thank you very much for that, Jessica. Closing remarks from you, Tom?
Thank you, Diana. I think my conclusion will start with emphasizing what Jessica has just said. One, there is our youth who underestimate the gravity of denial and the seriousness of the crime it's likely to cause, because genocide denial facilitates genocide perpetration. It feeds into the process of killing the memory in order to kill lives. Another thing which I should maybe tell you is that when you look at what is said now in the new narrative, there is a new narrative, but which is not very new, but an old one. Most of those deniers and their channels, they have changed from trying to deny about the crime they committed, from equalizing, that is the genocide, double genocide theory. They no longer have this of trying to qualify as a reaction. People's reacted, people's defended themselves, but they're now saying, actually, there was a genocide, but this genocide was planned and committed by the RPF. This is something new. And this is caused by the fact that they used to justify a crime committed by saying the downing of the President Habyarimana's plane caused the genocide. That was debunked by the French themselves, who were behind the original denials. But they keep now repeating the same message. We are fighting dictatorship. We are fighting the oppressors. We are pro-democracy. And they don't have challenges. And the good thing, which I got from Jessica, is their message repeated. They keep on repeating this message, using the principle of, instead of saying that you strike the iron when it is hot, but make the iron hot by striking. The propaganda methods they use are succeeding. They are succeeding simply because they keep on churning out their lies, and they have gathered support from foreigners who have just collected credibility from writing books. If you look at individuals, non-Rwandans, who got so-called Ingabire Victoire Peace Prizes, I don't know, blah blah blah. It's the who is who amongst the non-Rwandan deniers. The recent one is a Canadian lawyer called John Philpott. In that list, you have Judy River, and the two. Let me talk about these two people. When Bagosora died last year, September 25th, John Philpott sent a message to I think it was a Facebook audience message saying that a hero had died. And sorry, Diana, I'm just concluding.
Okay.
When you have genociders being called heroes, we are in danger. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. You know, Tom, you're a gem of of wisdom. I think we need to dedicate a show just having you with us on the square. But thank you so much for your closing remarks. And, you know, it's also inspiring to see you doing the work that you relentlessly do. It's an honor to have you on the show once again, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diane, and the squarists.
The squarists. Yeah, I would like to just go over to you, Louis-Antoine, briefly as possible, your closing remarks. Thank you.
Well, my message to the young people is a fight is not started by a large number of people. I think this country has been liberated by very young people, and they didn't have much, but they wanted absolutely to put a final end on the discrimination that has been characterizing this country ever since the colonialists entered this country. So it's here the same thing. You don't need to be 100 people. You don't need to be well equipped with beautiful cameras and everything that works well. You just take your phone, take your YouTube, your Twitter, and fight. And I'm sure the truth will always win against the denials and the fake news.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Louis-Antoine Muhire. Again, as always, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. I know, and I hope we'll be seeing more of you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Great. I just want to read just 2 tweets before we close the show. We have these tweets coming in. The first one says, interesting and timely theme on the square. It would appear that from the Holocaust to the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, genocide ideology movements have never been a fluke or happenstance. Spot on with that. These are planned, premeditated things. We have also another tweet coming in from him, who's Dolapo, and he says 2 questions. 1, how can such movements' narratives be countered? And 2, what are the roles of media in highlighting the right narratives? Very valid questions that I will leave us to think of as food for thought as we come to the end of the show. To our guests, Jessica, Tom, it's been an honor having you. Thank you very much. Muhire, it's also been great having you on the show. Thank you very much. Great. And to Berna, always a pleasure to have you. Charles, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Like I said earlier on, next week we'll also be having a similar conversation on pressing matters when it comes to this period of memorial, remembering the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, and some pressing issues that we need to look at and examine as a collective, as a country, as a people. Thank you to our viewers for tuning in and sharing their tweets using #TheSquareRW. Keep the conversation going. To our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for always supporting The Square. Have a good night and see you again next week.